This is Dom Bettinelli, the CEO of SQPN, with a brief but very important message. For more than a decade, SQPN has produced the Catholic faith and pop culture podcasts that you love. We're a nonprofit organization, so it's only your generosity that lets us carry out our mission. We haven't run a fundraiser in 2 years, and that's why we need to ask for your help right now. Please make a pledge of whatever amount you can afford to help us continue providing your favorite podcasts, as well as exciting new ones we have planned. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. Thank you for your generosity. May we hear from you today? You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode number 27.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. Today we're discussing Star Trek Discovery's Vulcan Hello. That's right, the first episode of the newest series, Star Trek Discovery. Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Hey, Dom, I just want to wish you and Father Corey a very warm Vulcan hello.
Rather not, thanks.
Actually, our Vulcan hello is kind of cold.
Well.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
Right.
Yeah. Vulcan hellos are best served cold.
Now we're really mixing it up. I want to first start by, as we often do, reminding the listeners to, if you can, go like the Secrets of Star Trek episodes on Facebook, on the SQPN Facebook page, to follow SQPN on Twitter, and to like and retweet our tweets about this show. Leave us comments, subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, and on YouTube. And when you subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell to get notifications, to write us a review on one of the podcast directories, and share the podcast with your Trekkie friends to help us grow our community of listeners, to reach more folks with what we're doing here, and because the more people we reach, the more it benefits you as the show grows and gets better. Jimmy, before we get into the talking about the Vulcan Hello, can you give us a few words about SQPN's giving campaign?
Yeah, so right now, SQPN or StarQuest is running a giving campaign. We haven't run one in 2 years, and our funds are low, and so we need to get them replenished if we're going to keep producing podcasts like this one. Some months ago, the board made a decision that we wanted to ramp up our podcasting efforts. We'd kind of been limping along with just one podcast. But our mission is to bring people closer to God. That's in our name. That's why we're called StarQuest. It's a reference to the Bethlehem star that led people to Jesus. And we want to do that by exploring faith and pop culture, looking at pop culture things like Doctor Who or Star Trek, from a Catholic perspective. And so that's our mission. And we wanted to embrace that mission more fully and produce a larger line of programs. That's one of the reasons now that we're doing Secrets of Star Trek, as well as other shows, including Let's Talk and Jimmy Akin's Mysterious Universe. If you like those shows and want to keep hearing them, we need to hear from you, because we have additional labor costs and production costs and technical costs. And the way you can help us is by going to SQPN.com. That's for SQPN for StarQuest Podcast Network.com/give, GIVE. So SQPN.com/give. Click on the Patreon link there, become one of our regular monthly Patreon supporters. We have some thank you gifts that we'd really like to send you in token of acknowledging your generosity. And we have them themed based on 3 of your favorite shows. One of them is Secrets of Doctor Who. Another is Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. But we also, for people who are particular fans of Star Trek, have some Star Trek-themed gifts. One of them is a book that is very interesting. It's an in-universe book called The Autobiography of James T. Kirk, and it offers a perspective on the famous Kirk stories from Kirk's own point of view, including things like Star Trek V and his interesting take on the search for God. In addition, we have, depending on how the level you're able to support us at, we have a couple of additional Star Trek gifts. One of them is Volume 1 of the 50-Year Mission, which is an oral history of Star Trek. The other is Volume 2 of the 50-year mission. Volume 1 covers the beginning of Star Trek up through kind of right up to the point where Next Gen was going to begin. Then Volume 2 picks up with Next Gen and goes through the J.J. Abrams movies. It covers both the TV shows, the fandom, the convention, the novels, the comics, all that stuff. And since it's an oral history, the editors of the book went and interviewed all of the producers and writers and actors and really wanted to give you a behind-the-scenes perspective on how Star Trek came together in all of its different iterations and incarnations. And it's a fascinating read. They cover not only the things that worked, but some of the things that didn't work so well, including some of the behind-the-scenes conflicts. And so it makes for very interesting reading. And we'd like to send both volumes of the 50-Year Mission to you, along with the autobiography of James T. Kirk, as thank yous for your generosity. The way to help us out, once again, is go to sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give. And thank you very much for all of your assistance.
Thank you, Jimmy. So, folks, today we're talking about the secrets of Star Trek. We're talking about Star Trek Discovery and the secrets of it, but particularly the first episode of the series, the pilot episode called The Vulcan Hello. Now, just as a precursor, we've actually already had discussions about the first season of Star Trek Discovery. We divided into 2 parts. We did that as part of our Secrets of Movies and TV Shows podcast. But if you go to sqpn.com/trek, you can see, if you scroll down, you'll see those episodes there listed, and you can go back and listen to it. There are overviews of the first season in 2 parts, because the first season came to us in 2 parts. And but we're going to talk specifically about the Vulcan Hello this time, and get into
an episode review.
An episode review. Thank you. And it would be hard to recap this adequately.
Stuff happens.
It takes place, as you know, presumably you know that it takes place before 10 years before the first episode of the original series, on a ship called the Discovery. Well, eventually on a ship.
The Shenzhou.
Right. This episode takes place on the Shenzhou, and it features a main character, or the protagonist that we follow is not a commander of a starship, which is unique in Star Trek now. Is Michael Burnham, a Starfleet officer. So far at this point, she is the executive officer of the Shenzhou under Captain Giorgio, played by Michelle Yeoh. You may know her from many movies. She's an accomplished
super cop.
Right. Well, and I was going to say the Crouching Tiger,
Hidden Dragon.
Hidden Dragon. Yes, she's a Chinese actress. She was very good, and we eventually get to see her get out some of her martial arts training in later on. She's an accomplished martial artist. So where to go with this? We start off with the Klingons, this Klingon leader, speaking in Klingon, who basically tells us the Klingons have lost their way. They've forgotten the way of honor and glory. And so a beacon, which turns out is a literal beacon, must be lit to call them back to unity in the face of an exterior threat, which they see as the Federation.
Even though almost nobody from the Federation has seen a Klingon in over 100 years, it seems to me you could pick a more immediate threat if you want to unite your people.
And they went from we haven't seen the Klingons at all in 100 years too well. We see them once in a while, but we're in a Cold War to, oh yeah, they attacked one of our outposts that Michael Burnham is from. And it's just like,
yeah,
they went from nothing to, they're actually actively having conflict within this last 100 years. Which, by the way,
it's easy to see. It's easy to take it that way. I tried to check, and I think the line is almost no one has seen a Klingon in almost 100 years.
Right.
So they've got a little window in there to allow things like the attack that killed Michael's parents.
But the interesting thing about this is they said 100 years. Well, what was set 100 years before Discovery? Exactly 100 years before Discovery?
Yeah.
Enterprise.
Right. Enterprise.
So they're saying, so after Enterprise, after what we see in the Star Trek Enterprise, the Klingons and the Federation basically separate for a while, and now they're coming back together.
Right. And
years later.
And that doesn't make sense to me, because you wouldn't expect, after the kind of engagements they had, for a warrior race to say, we're going to just stay behind our border for 100 years.
Well,
and
they try to explain it, I think, and it comes out a little bit in this episode and maybe again in the next one, but they kind of explain that there's been so much infighting that the Empire has fractured, and the inter-house divisions have turned all of their focus inward against one another instead of outward in a unified fashion against the galaxy around them. So they've really, so I think that what they're kind of saying is they've been so focused on insular problems and attacking one another that T'Kuvma, which we find is the name of this sort of Klingon messiah figure, is trying to unite the houses again out in an outward fashion to reclaim their honor and glory.
Yeah. And he even uses the word crusade, and there's actually kind of an interesting parallel here from history, because one of the problems that happened in Europe during the Middle Ages was there was huge infighting among Christian princes. And the popes were very concerned about this. They were trying to get the Pax Christi, or Peace of Christ, over Europe, which was the center of Christian civilization. They didn't want all this infighting. And one of the things that happened was they began to launch crusades against external threats, in the Middle East, because you had Muslim aggression happening there. And those crusades had the effect of dampening down some of the tensions in Europe, although never perfectly and never permanently, because they then re-erupted long after the Crusades in like the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and really ever since until after World War II. It wasn't until after World War II that things finally settled down in Europe.
Yep. Yes, that's actually a good parallel to compare it to, was the Crusades. We have already discussed the Klingon redesign, the changes.
Don't like.
Yeah, like a lot of fans, none of us really like the change. I mean, I'm okay with change, but this seemed like change for change's sake, changing something that was well established. I mean, it would be like changing Vulcans to give them like weird head ridges and taking away pointy ears. I mean, it didn't seem necessary on that. So,
word on the street is that they've taken that to heart and are remodifying the Klingon design for season 2.
That should be interesting, but I wonder how far that will go. But it'll be interesting to see if we get some of the classic Trek look back. And that was part of the, I think, complaints, was that we didn't feel like Star Trek in some ways, because everything seems so different, including the uniforms, which is another thing I've heard is changing with season 2, is we're going to start to see some of the classic yellow and red.
They've shown in some of their preview
Captain Pike wearing the yellow
teasers, where he's wearing the original series style uniform.
Right.
And I wasn't opposed. I kind of like the uniform in Discovery. I think they're good looking uniforms.
Yeah.
They're just not classic Trek looking uniforms.
I just like the colors. Yeah,
they're also kind of a bridge between the Enterprise, Star Trek Enterprise prequel uniforms and the eventual uniforms.
That's true. This is true. They look much more like the Enterprise uniforms. So we get our first glimpse of our protagonist, Burnham and Giorgio, on this planet, this Crepusculus, I think it's called, or something, which is
okay. This word crepuscular has an actual meaning, you know.
Yeah, it sounds a little too much like crepuscular.
Yeah, which an organism is crepuscular if it comes out at twilight and dawn.
Right. Which doesn't seem like a twilight planet. This is another desert planet, because apparently the universe is full of barely habitable desert planets. They tell us that radiation dried out a water table. I'm not sure what the physics of that is, but okay.
Yeah, how does radiation? I mean, heat radiation, maybe.
Well, and right.
It was like remnants from asteroid mining or something like that. Some radiation from it caused this.
Right. So some asteroid in space, and so for some reason the Federation felt necessary to that it didn't
help these people.
Right. Didn't invite the Prime Directive to go down and help these people. It very thin premise here that we're working on.
Easiest fix for a drought ever, though. Fire 3 shots from a blaster
down and open up the well.
Down a well.
Why didn't they just walk to the well instead of like beaming down, 5 miles away? I mean, like, why did they beam down to it instead of beaming down 5 miles away and walking to the desert to it? There was a whole lot of stuff that didn't make sense there.
Or punch through from orbit and just do the well from orbit.
Right. Yeah. Although I suppose that'd be more visible to the locals.
What really struck me about this scene, and there's some things I like about it, like where it turns out Captain Giorgio has had them walk in the shape of a Starfleet symbol to identify their location. I thought that was cool.
Yep.
But so on our first meeting with Michael Burnham, Giorgio asks Michael what her estimate of when the storm is going to hit them is. And she says 1 hour, 17 minutes, and 22 seconds. And I'm like, please, come on.
To the second, yeah.
That's ridiculous. Even if you're raised on Vulcan, you're a human, and that's ridiculous. I like the desert planet landscape. I thought, the imaging was nice. I like the special effects in general and all this. But then during this scene, it's like dueling exposition with Captain Giorgio. I mean, Michael exposits, Captain Giorgio exposits, and it just bounces back and forth. And I'm like, it's dueling exposition.
Well, what we get here is the writers want to make sure we know that Burnham is a human with a Vulcan-like personality, that she's a fast rising star in Starfleet about to rise to command, and like we're establishing all this stuff about Burnham because we're about to have all this other stuff thrown at us as things develop over the next 2 episodes. It's been clunky like this in previous Star Trek pilots. I mean, it's really Star Trek pilots have to establish a lot very quickly so that we can then get into the regular action and adventure. But you're right, it does feel clunky and a little boring to have them talking so much.
And it keeps going like that in this episode, as I'm sure we'll cover. I would say this, this is certainly more enjoyable than Encounter at Farpoint.
Yes.
And I would think it's even more enjoyable than, for me, it's more enjoyable probably than Caretaker.
Yep.
Maybe, but it's not our best, and it is clunky.
Right. It does not surpass either No Man Has Gone Before or Emissary for me. So yeah, I agree. So it's about middle of the pack. It does. One thing I would point out is these first 2 episodes, they subvert our expectations because the show is called Star Trek Discovery, and the Discovery is nowhere to be seen in these first 2 episodes. In fact, these first 2 episodes are essentially a long prologue for the series. What they do is they set up Michael Burnham as the fallen Starfleet officer, the really a sort of villainous character to start, a mutineer who started a war, and so that's kind of interesting. The choices they make, they certainly are different. This is not just another retread of Next Gen or the original series or anything that's come before. So I'll give them that.
Yeah. And even though there was criticism at the time, like, where's the Discovery? I don't have a problem with, okay, this is the prequel to the story you're about to tell us. That's fine. I can, yeah.
Yeah. We are told that it's stardate 1207.3, which is May 11th, 2256, a Sunday. Not sure why the sort of Vulcan over precision. But I think it's one of the first time ever told an actual, like, an equivalent between the stardate and the day and year, like the day, the date, the actual date.
Yeah, we're not told that often.
Yeah.
One thing, so since we're at the beginning of the episode, after the initial desert planet opening, we have the opening credits.
Right.
Or after the Klingon sequence in the desert planet, we have the opening credits, which are very distinct from any credits we've seen on Star Trek before.
Right.
And I think they really work for me, both, visually and in terms of sound, and with the original theme fanfare right there at the end. These if you're going to have credits, which these days you kind of don't need, but you certainly don't need ones this long. But if you're going to have them, these work for me.
Well, you need to have credits this long because there are more producers listed than there are actors. It's like, there's 20 people are listed, some role of producer, executive producer, assistant producer to the assistant producer to the assistant producer. I mean,
well, some of it has to do with the turnover of people running the show, which is the whole nother bit. I think we actually talked about that in our overview. It was the turnover.
This is also the first 1 hour opening we've had since the original series. All of the intervening series, except the animated, which had like a 30-minute opening, have had 2 hour openings.
Right. And we kind of talked before about how because it's two prologue episodes, it's it's covering one sort of story. It's kind of 2 hour, but yeah.
And when they released this, this episode was broadcast on CBS television, on regular over the air television, and then you had to go to their All Access to watch the second part. Right. Which we'll talk about next time we talk about Discovery.
Yes. I agree with you, Jay. I do like the opening. I like the music. It's certainly better than Enterprise. Although we had someone disagree with us on Facebook about they really liked the Enterprise theme music. They felt it was the lyrics were hopeful filled, and
I don't mind the thing. I don't mind the Faith of the Heart thing on Enterprise. It's I'm not adamantly opposed to it.
Yeah. I like the idea, that the original series established that a Star Trek series opening, is you see the ship in space, or in the case of Deep Space Nine, you see the space station not moving around, but where it is in space.
Yep.
And this sort of, subverts that expectation. Says it's a new time, new sensibilities. We have a different artistic take, and we're doing it differently. And I like that. It was good. Mm-hmm. We get introduced. Go ahead. Anything?
Well, I was going to say, once we get past the credits and we have the opening narration from Michael, we also get to see some new special effects with the warp drive special effects, the ship is traveling at warp. And this is less successful for me. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to look at, and I wouldn't mind it anywhere else, but it feels more like change for change's sake rather than a definite improvement.
Right. There's some of the effects, especially the practical effects or the combination of visual and practical effects, say of the ship and on the bridge. I like those changes. There's some cool technology, but some of the visual changes in space, the strictly visual changes, it feels like, because they did that with the movie. They changed how warp drive looks, and then they did
and what the transporter effect looks like, and
it's just like change for change's sake. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. See, one thing I did like, speaking of that, though, with the transporter effect, where they made it clear that this is an older form of transporter technology. Yeah. And so it takes longer and it looks very different than what they show later on for a more modern, quote unquote, transporter.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
We do have, just sticking with the visual level for a minute, we do have across the board higher production values than anything we've seen on Star Trek television before.
Yes.
It just, the special effects look better, the visual, the color intensity, the crispness. They really have taken that up a level. And also visually, they're giving us things like angles in space that they have never given us before, not in these numbers, certainly, where you're getting these Dutch angles in space. You're looking at things from a much more three-dimensional perspective.
Well,
Right.
And they're making space feel creepy.
Yes.
The way it's all lit and everything.
Just the idea that the bridge of the Shenzhou is on the bottom of the saucer, not the top, so it shows Burnham standing upside down by their perspective.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they do
Things like that.
They do a couple. There's one shot where the Shenzhou is facing down the giant Klingon ship, Tukufma
The
ship.
sarcophagus ship.
Yep. And the Shenzhou is at an angle toward it, like it's like from the perspective of the Klingon ship.
Right.
The Shenzhou is at an angle, an odd angle.
Yeah, it's not like you always see like where the Klingons are facing down the Enterprise.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's not like you always see the Klingons facing the Enterprise and they're always face to face. I mean, like they're nose to nose, you know.
Well, I was going to say it's still ridiculously close to the Klingon ship. I mean, you would never want to be, unless you're preparing to dock, you would never want to be that close to another ship in space.
That's because the Klingons uncloaked right next to them.
Yeah, well, they should have immediately. Neither one should be that close to each other.
Right. I get that. It would be hard to target.
Well, to be fair, Saru did say you need to back off. So
right.
He kept trying to say we need to retreat. We need to retreat. We need to retreat.
One other thing they do with the shots in space is they do the Battlestar Galactica like handheld camera thing. Not quite
shaky cam.
not quite to the level of BSG, but similar to that. You have that shaky cam, that handheld feel to it, which is interesting.
Also, one thing I liked about this episode, we have one of these super intense, rock fields in space. Mm-hmm. And normally when you see them, like in Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, when they're in the asteroid field and it's okay, asteroid fields actually don't have this number of asteroids zipping around because they're unstable if they do. Our asteroid belt here in the solar system is way, way, way thin. That's why we can send space probes through it.
Right.
And so this ridiculous number of asteroids that you see normally in science fiction is very scientifically unbelievable. But this is an accretion disk.
Right.
And so it's like, this is what you would have, or at least it's a lot more believable to say we've got all this rock junk that is in the process of congealing into planets gravitationally. And so you could have a much denser field. So just from a scientific point of view, that's a lot more believable than a dense asteroid field.
But they do then blow it by saying, by sending her in the suit through the field. They're 2,000 kilometers away from this object. It takes her 7 minutes to get there.
How fast is she going?
She averaged over 10,000 miles per hour in this spacesuit.
Well, It has an inertial dampener on it, right?
It was some kind of deflectors, too.
2,000 kilometers in 7 minutes is an average of 4,760 miles per second, which is about 10,000 miles per hour. 10,500, I think, is closer.
Well, okay.
I'm not a Vulcan, so I'm not going to get down to the precision of decimal.
And why not
points.
send a shuttle? That's another question.
Well, because it's too dense. It's too dense.
Okay.
Is the reason. But I did like, in principle. Now, I thought the way they executed some of the spacesuit stuff was not as great, but I like the fact that they used a spacesuit.
Oh, yeah.
I liked the sequence. I liked it better than the ridiculous spacesuit use in Star Trek Into Darkness. This is a reasonable thing to do with a spacesuit. You go and look at a phenomenon that you can't get a shuttle to because of size.
It did remind me of Spock in the original motion picture.
Yeah, but if you think about it, we almost never see spacesuits in Star Trek. That and this are the only two. Well, I mean, I guess there's spacesuits in First Contact. Yeah. But we so seldom see it. So I liked seeing it. I liked the heads up augmented reality display in the spacesuit helmet. I like that. So I thought in general that was really good. I thought that aspects of it were not as good. The whole she's got to be back here in exactly 19 minutes or her DNA is going to unspool.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not how radiation poisoning works.
Right.
Also,
well, and if she gets back in 18 minutes and 50, they can save her. She's fine. But if it's 1901, she's toast.
Yeah, that's just not how it works.
Yeah.
When she wakes up in sickbay, I mean, she confirmed on camera that her suit was recording this.
Right.
And that's not, if they hadn't included that moment, then you could say, well, her suit was broken. They didn't get any data off of it. But if she confirms it on camera for the audience, that's a promise to the audience that the suit is getting this.
Right.
And then why didn't they examine the data on the suit while she was in sickbay
they said
and
it was,
understand their situation?
Oh, it was damaged after the fact.
Well,
it was
fine.
damaged when she ran into the Klingon.
Yeah, okay, but then you don't include the moment promising the audience you're getting this.
Right. The fact that they don't believe her, it's like, it's convenient. It's too convenient. Like either the suit's recording it or it's not recording it. Yeah.
To be fair, I think actually the way they put it is the final few minutes were damaged. You know, so like it didn't actually save that little snippet where she actually ran into the Klingon and fought him,
and all the different sensors and all the I don't know. I just think I get. I mean, I get why they do it for the dramatic effect. It's just that it bothers me on a practical level.
Also, I don't mind the fact that the suit was damaged. I just think they didn't set it up right. Also, when she gets to the Klingon object and she's doing her initial survey of it, she's narrating and says, the construction and design are nothing short of astounding. And this is an example of what's been called informed attributes,
right? Where
instead of showing you something, you're told about it,
right? And
that it's a cheap form of writing, and frankly, I think it's unnecessary. Just the visuals can sell this thing to the audience.
I mean, it's a stunning visuals that they put on it. It really is incredible.
Well, there's an overall the problem that a lot of shows do, not just this one, which is they feel this need that the actor has to just keep telling us about everything that they're doing and seeing. Mm-hmm. I'm now flipping on the switch. I'm looking at the monitor. I mean, it's like, just do the thing. I can see you doing it. You don't need to tell me you're doing it. You know. One of the things that kind of bugged me was I still don't know what the beacon was doing here. Like, why was it here? What was really about? I just didn't feel like they explained enough of it.
I think the reason is they're in Federation space. The Klingons have come to Federation space. They've planted the beacon here to summon all of the Klingon ships so they can provoke a war with the Federation.
Right. And
so the Federation will perceive this as an incursion on their territory, and that'll lead to the conflict.
That's why they had the whole thing of the communication probe being shot.
Well, I get that. Yeah. I mean,
by the way, one more note on the beacon. Our presence has triggered some sort of motion response.
Some sort.
It's like, that's some sort of line I've heard before.
Some sort of I love Voyager. Yeah.
Motion response. Can't you just say
it moved?
We tripped a motion alarm and it moved.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, we send out this beacon, and apparently Klingon ships can travel from halfway across the quadrant instantaneously. This is the classic Star Trek problem of how fast can warp-powered ships go, actually.
Well, not just can those ships travel halfway across the quadrant in a blink of an eye, but apparently the light from this beacon can travel all the way across the quadrant in a blink of an eye.
Right.
Right. And so we have that as a problem. This beacon should be light speed limited from the way they've set it up. And so these ships shouldn't even be receiving the message for years and years. And then they all arrive within seconds of each other.
Right.
No matter how far away they were coming from. It's like 24 houses scattered over Klingon space really have ships just ready to go all at the same moment. I can headcanon these things. I can say that, when they lit the beacon, they also started live streaming subspace YouTube video of it so that all of the houses were notified without the light speed limit. And then maybe they all staged somewhere a light year away and then flew in together as some kind of ceremony. But none of that is set up for us, and if you don't set it up, it violates credibility.
In fact, Sarek, when we get Burnham talking to Sarek, says the quadrant sees a new star in the sky.
Yeah,
How?
exactly.
Yeah.
Its light travels 186,000 miles per second. That's not going to reach you for about 50, 60, 70 years at best.
If not more.
If not more. That's sort of like, if you're going to be a science fiction show, let's stick to the science. Have it be a beacon that transmits a subspace message. What, and maybe a symbolic light as well. Okay, sure. Let's have a symbolic light, but say it transmits a subspace message that calls them.
Yeah,
and not do this other stuff that just it's sloppy. And if there's one thing that Star Trek fans are about, we hate the sloppy writing that kind of does disservice to actual science, because we love science. That's, a lot of us do, science fiction fans. Okay, so that's our complaints about that. I'm sure we'll have more complaints. We really do like Star Trek, folks. We really do. But this is we highlight the good and the bad.
I like this series overall, but this is a shaky start.
Yes. We get introduced to the crew. We find out here that
one of him.
Well, right. Well, because only one is. Well, actually, a couple of them will make it to the Discovery. But one speaking role.
Only one has a personality.
Yes, and that's Saru, the science officer who is. I get Kelpian. I had Crepusculan stuck in my head, but Kelpian, yes, which is a new species that we learn are they're evolved as a prey species, prey species, and therefore extremely sensitive to impending danger. And I thought
they've been bred to sense death.
Yes,
and he feels it coming now.
And there's an interesting line when he explains that. He says, on your planet, you have food chains, which we do, of course. You have an apex predator, which preys on other things, and that thing preys on other things, and that thing preys on other things. And he's saying we don't have that on mine. We're binary. There are predator species and prey species, and I'm a prey species, so I don't get to prey on anything else. And that puts me in a unique evolutionary position. We've been bred to sense the approach of death. Well, okay, your people are intelligent. Normally, prey is not bred for intelligence,
right?
And you don't need intelligence to sneak up on a blade of grass. And it's the people who need the intelligence are the predators that have to sneak up on the prey. So, evolutionarily speaking, whoever bred you should be smarter than you. Who is this, and where are they?
Yeah, what is the predator species like? Right, exactly. One of the things that kind of bugged me is Burnham and Giorgio's dismissive attitude towards Saru's species and his concerns is so racist.
What is with all the anti-Kelpian racism on this ship? There should be a complaint filed.
Well, there's anti-Klingon racism. There's anti-Vulcan racism. Vulcans have anti-human racism. There's a whole lot of racism in the Federation, I noticed. It's really not great.
Well,
by modern PC standards, certainly.
Yeah, right.
And it's funny because we talk about how there's the reason why the original series crew works so well is the dialogue between them, McCoy and Spock and Kirk. And there's lots of ribbing that goes on back and forth from all three.
Right. Yeah, they're having rap battles without the rap.
It's generally friendly ribbing, more or less.
On the bridge where it happened.
Yeah.
Hamilton reference.
Never seen it, never heard any of the music. Okay. So anyways, but this isn't friendly ribbing.
No.
To the point where Burnham goes over and basically pushes Saru away from the console so she can punch up information that he should have been able to pull up.
And then he shoves her back and has a subtle dig at her. They have this little pushing match over the console. I kind of like that.
That was clever. But this doesn't seem like friendly ribbing like, again, you saw with other crews.
And this gets into an area that I think is, again, part of the show's premier dynamic, in that There's a lot they need to establish for us about Kelpians and what they're like and stuff. And as a result, a lot of the dialogue feels forced.
Yeah.
It's not natural feeling dialogue. And it also suffers from a problem we've seen before on Star Trek in regard to like Commander Data. When he's first introduced, we're told he has he's been part of Starfleet for 25 years. But he's only at the beginning of his social development, because they're going to show his social development over the course of Next Gen. And so it's like he's absorbed nothing from his previous 25 years of service in Starfleet. And we see something like that here. Any initial, Kelpian cowardice things and dismissing of Kelpian views, that should have been taken care of before the series even began. Right. Just like Data should have started learning how to use contractions before Next Gen began. Here, the three main characters on the Shenzhou should have established a respectful, functional working relationship before this point.
Well, and it would be one thing if Saru was an ensign, fresh out of academy, whatever. You could have seen that.
He's not. He's second officer.
Yeah, he's lieutenant commander. I mean, he's fairly high ranking within Starfleet. You'd think he'd had a few years under his belt to take care of this kind of issue.
Right. They're giving him the bridge when the two of them walk off of it. So he's clearly a respected, capable figure. He shouldn't be constantly dissed this way. And he is so one note in this episode.
Yeah. He gets, and I like that later on in this season, he develops more and because a little more nuance to it and depth to his character, which I appreciate, especially given how he gets catapulted into command situations with the Discovery. So I do appreciate that about him. But yeah, you're right. In this episode, he's basically one note. He's afraid. He wants to run. Period. And
he's the anti-Worf.
Yes, right. Speaking of the Klingons, I'll kind of come back to them for a minute.
I did want to say I really like his visual design. For he's the most he's still a biped, but he's the most physically different alien that we've seen, given his height and everything like that, and the length of his limbs. Right. Even
just the way his feet are more hoof-like; they're more ovine. In that sense, like that, so it's very interesting that he's not just head bumpy alien like we've seen so often.
Yeah.
So the Klingons, speaking of head bumpy aliens, the design for the Klingons and their ships and their clothing seems vaguely Egyptian. I mean, it's not really. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of difference, but
that particular ship it definitely does.
Yeah, they kind of dial it back later on, and it kind of feels like that this may be some sort of religious ship. I mean, given that they're a warrior race,
very much so.
Their religion revolves around violence and war.
Well, and they mentioned that this is an ancient ship. This isn't like top of the line Klingon. This is a ship that's been around for a long time, and of course they developed that later in the series. They talk more about it.
And
it's covered with coffins, some of which are thousands of years old.
I found that interesting. That it's kind of to talk about the Klingon religion. There isn't a whole lot of that in the previous series, and we get much more of a sense of Klingons. They according to Klingon mythology, Kahless,
the first Klingons killed their gods.
Yeah, Kahless killed the gods, and so they don't have gods.
No. Even before Kahless, and then Kahless united their houses.
Okay. So they don't have gods that they worship, but there's still a sort of religion that is sort of presented in these Klingons. T'Kuvma is a messiah figure, as I said. They have specific religious rituals. They fight with the bodies of the dead adorning their ship's hull. I liked that depth.
They believe the dead have a black fleet that they continue to fight in the afterlife.
Sto-vo-kor is the afterlife, and we have heard in previous series. Grethor is Klingon hell. Yeah.
Otherwise, you get on the barge of the dead.
Right. And so I do like that the Klingons have been a developed species, and that's continued in this series. I like that about it. Another race, the classic race that we are seeing again, is the Vulcans. Burnham flashes back to her childhood, to this testing that they do with the Vulcan kids, which we have seen before. We saw Spock doing it in Star Trek IV, A Voyage Home. And we get another bit of speciesism again. We have Sarek, who intentionally, as part of this testing, throws this emotionally damaging imagery at her of the moment that the Klingons killed her parents as part of the test, and then tells her that, well, see, this is the problem. Your human heart is a problem, and that's that. And we have different species. What's that?
Was that imagery diegetic or non-diegetic? Because I thought that was what her mind was conjuring.
No, it was definitely part of the test. It was very clearly part of the testing, and it was sort of Sarek trying to see if she could stay unemotional. And what we keep seeing is different species judging other species by their own standards. Humans judging Kelpians by human standards, Vulcans judging humans by Vulcan standards, and it just
and to some extent that's going to happen if we meet other species,
right?
But the Vulcans hadn't learned that in 100 years, though, because we had the same complaint about Enterprise, where the Vulcans were judging humans by Vulcan standards,
and vice versa.
So they apparently haven't learned yet.
Spock will do it in the original series 10 years from now. Right. It's just a question of, despite our differences, can we establish functional working relationships?
Yeah, right. One of the things that kind of gets me with this is Sarek should be above that, shouldn't he? I mean, given that he's kind of married to a human woman who very clearly does not subscribe to Vulcan standards of lack of emotion.
Well, he's also known to be an experimenter, which they talk about later in this series. He has these interracial experiments like Michael and Spock going.
Yeah, okay, all right. I mean, that's true. It's I don't know. It's just something that kind of bugs me about this perfect future that Roddenberry proposed. No poverty, no lack, except there's always still this.
There's all this racism.
But as we've said before in previous episodes, if everything were perfect, it would be a very boring series. If there were no conflict, there would be nothing to do except watch people sit around.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine the Stardate episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Nothing happened.
Yes, we were flying along.
We went about our day. We monitored what we were supposed to monitor. The ship ran as expected. No transporter accidents. No holodeck accidents. It was a good day. The end.
The end of the episode. We get introduced to Voq, the albino Klingon, and now that you've seen the whole... Okay, spoiler alert, folks. As we get most of the way through talking about this episode, we're going to say about... If you haven't watched the whole first season of Discovery, you might want to skip ahead to about 5 or 10 minutes because we're going to spoil an important plot point for later on in the season. Evidently having to do with Voq, the albino Klingon, but so that's your clue right now. All right, if you're still around, Voq, the albino, did it occur to you? Did it play differently for you now, knowing now what you know from later on about who Voq will eventually be?
Not really for me. I just thought, oh, they're okay. There's Voq, and I know who he's going to end up being.
Same. I did recognize the voice this time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had trouble.
The voice was clear to me this time, but
I had trouble picturing the actor under all of that makeup. Like I tried to say, I'm trying to see that guy there, and I am not seeing him there. So I got to give them credit. It's really
when
Voq has to give up everything, it includes all of that makeup.
Right.
Yeah. One thing I do love though is the way they played it when the series was airing, quote unquote, when it was being released, where they actually created a Twitter account of supposedly the actor who looks like this supposedly naturally. This is like his natural appearance.
Right.
And they had this whole Twitter account, and course, I think it was like some low-level lackey in, CBS production somewhere that was doing
they had an IMDb entry for him too, and his name in Persian meant something like "live long and prosper."
Right. There was a very concerted effort to keep the surprise, which in these days of the internet and everything,
bravo to them. They played it well. People were convinced that this really was the actor, and he was just hiding his face behind the mask or whatever.
Yeah, it was pretty good surprise later on. So then we get to an explanation of what is the Vulcan hello, the title of the episode. And the Vulcan hello to the Klingons was, we fire first to earn their respect and bring about peace.
And we keep doing that until they respect us.
Right. But this time firing first was the wrong move, wasn't it? You mean
was it? So I think, and I think the show is ambiguous here because Captain Giorgio does not follow her advice, and they wait until and we don't even see them fire in this episode, but they wait until all these other ships have come. Yeah. And before the firing happens, and that's what provokes the war. I think the argument would be that if they had fired on schedule when Burnham wanted them to, before these ships got here, then it wouldn't have been the same kind of provocation, and it might have worked. At least that's debatable.
Yeah. Well, sorry.
But go ahead.
Sorry. And the difference is, though, it wasn't that the Vulcans fired first. It was the Klingons destroyed the Vulcan ship first, and the Vulcans realized, if we are going to deal with the Klingons, we need to respond in kind until they don't try to destroy us.
Right. So let's talk for a moment about just how irrational Michael Burnham comes off at this moment, because up to now she's been portrayed as pretty rational. Well, okay. Sarek tells her, this worked for us. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you.
Right.
So she's been warned. And then when she storms up to Captain Giorgio, she says, Captain, you've got to fire on the Klingon ship. Out of the blue, with no supporting evidence for that proposition. Exactly. Of course, Giorgio is going to say, no, I'm not going to.
Yeah.
If you want to convince your captain to do something as provocative as that, then you're going to need to lay the foundation for it first. And she doesn't do that. So she's just come out of a meeting with Sarek where she's been warned this may not work for you. And she is so headstrong about it that she just demands it with no supporting context. Then she becomes publicly insubordinate to her captain. And then when she gets taken aside in private to be privately rebuked instead of dressed down in front of the crew, she then physically assaults the captain and comes out with a transparent attempt to subvert the captain's wishes that everybody can see is bogus.
Right.
It's like she is seriously off the rails at this point.
Right.
Yeah, that's one thing I missed the first time we watched this. But I saw it here when I rewatched this the other day. Her personality takes a major switch here, and they played it well. I mean, it actually, you look at it where it's obvious that, at least as I saw it, that Burnham is still deeply, deeply, deeply affected by what the Klingons did to her family.
Right.
And this is coming out of that. Her whole reaction to this situation is coming out of that. It's not out of logic. It's not out of, rational thought. It's out of hurt, and I must make them pay for what they did to my family.
And there's even a moment where she starts to admit that to Captain Giorgio and says, maybe you're right. And then she physically assaults her.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, because, I think we're meant to understand that because she had to emotionally suppress her, or to suppress her emotions surrounding this traumatic event, because she was in a Vulcan foster home, that she never really dealt with it as growing up. And so when we now encounter Klingons for the first time as an officer, she loses it. She has a break.
Exactly.
Well, especially given that she just had a violent encounter with a Klingon on the beacon. So she has this psychological break that causes her to do this. I mean, this, like you said, it was such a transparent lie that, oh, the captain changed her mind in the other room, but you can't go ask her because she told me that it's okay. Like if one of my kids ran out and said, oh, mommy changed her mind and said that I can have the cookie now, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to check with mommy to make sure on that one.
Oh, don't mind the fact that she's passed out on the floor. You know?
She's resting. I mean, ironically, Burnham uses the her criticism of Saru's questioning of the chain of command to bolster her own insubordination. I mean, it's just completely crazy.
I'm sorry, the chain of command doesn't prevent you from asking for confirmation on orders of questionable legality.
Exactly.
In fact, that was one thing that they drilled into our heads in Air Force basic training is if you are given a legal order, not just are you not to follow that order, you are to call them on it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
immediate. I mean, there's no question.
Right. Especially if that person's superior is literally in the next room. Like literally, I'll just go check with her. Okay. She's right there, right? She's still there. Yeah. Okay. I'll just go check with her. No. So then we end with the cliffhanger. We're going to find a resolution of this Vulcan hello in the next episode. Which we will be talking about soon. So any last thoughts about this episode here? We want to bring up before we wrap up?
Just a minor thing. When the beacon goes off and we have all that light shining in through the ship's windows, my first thought was, why isn't this being filtered out? Because you would have filters to prevent this kind of thing from happening. I mean, there would be stuff in the glass that should darken.
Which they said.
And then I know. Then they take care of that and say the filters are at 100%. Okay, so let's close the shutters. There should be shutters. You ought to be able to have, there should be some kind of, if you're going to have glass or force fields or whatever that
transparent aluminum.
Transparent aluminum, whatever it is. There should be opaque shutters that you can put over it. And so I found that implausible.
Yeah.
But it was visually interesting.
I kind of always go back to the original series where it was a view screen, and that's all it was.
That was my other thought. Yeah. Turn off the view screen.
Right. But, of course, it's not a view screen now in this one or in the Kelvin timeline, but it's a window in which has a heads-up display sort of projected on it. And I don't know that that's actually – I mean, we've talked about it before. The best place for the bridge of the ship is somewhere like deep in the middle.
Right. Yeah. And even then, you don't want something that's transparent to, say, laser light and things like that, because it's a vulnerability.
Right.
Sometimes you just want to turn off the TV and unplug and read a book.
Right.
And by the way, that's one thing Battlestar Galactica, at least the reboot Battlestar Galactica did a good thing. The CIC was in the middle of the ship, the hardened part of the ship. It wasn't at the nose. Just
like any U.S. Navy or any other Navy ship today, there's a bridge that they drive the ship from because you got to see the buoys and whatnot. But when you're fighting the ship, the captain is in the CIC fighting the ship.
The Combat Information Center.
Sorry, yes, the Combat Information Center. Okay, that's good. So,
or the Battle Bridge.
The Battle Bridge, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
one thing I will say though, watching this, of course, again, watched it when it first aired, and it was enough to get me to say, okay, I'll give this a second chance and watch, the second episode, and it kept me going. But watching this the second time, I actually like it better now than I did the first time I watched it.
Right. Given that
I don't think it's brilliant. I don't think it's brilliant TV. I don't think it's the best Star Trek ever written. But I think I like it better the second time watching than I did the first.
I have a little different reaction. I don't remember how much the flaws leapt out at me the first time I saw it, but I had a definite, I remember my overall impression was positive, but this time the flaws made a stronger impression on me than I remember them doing the first time. So I actually may have liked it a little less this time.
I think for me, given that I know the characters better from watching the whole season, I know where the story goes. I think I'm with Father Corey in this. I I think when I first saw this, I was worried. I'm like, there's really things I don't like about this. Is this going to be good? But once I saw the whole season, and now looking back on this again, I'm like, okay, it turns out good, and in fact better than this episode. So that in some ways makes this episode better, or at least not a disappointment.
Right, rising tide raises all ships.
Exactly. And hindsight is 2020. So all right, so like that's our overall assessment then, I guess. I don't know if I have like a little bit of feedback from folks, maybe one or two bits. On our overview of the original series, Ray Leroy said, great episode. I just finished a 1.5 year binge of all Star Trek movies and TV shows. That is quite a binge.
That's epic.
That is epic. You mentioned a few of my favorite TOS episodes, The City on the Edge of Forever, Doomsday Machine, and Space Seed. I was also blown away by A Taste of Armageddon. Also, can't believe you didn't bring up Bread in Circuses. We can't bring them all up, but yes, it's another good one. That was the one that had the Roman episode, the space Romans.
Oh, sure.
And then Raby says, so glad someone told me about your show. I'm so glad they told you about it too. And that's exactly what we're talking about, folks. If you can recommend the show to someone and get them excited about it too. Let's see if there's anything else. On our overview of The Next Generation, Alfredo says, I clearly remember the first time I saw it with my brother and sister. We were so excited after years of the original series. We saw it in our Fox affiliate in San Diego, and we did not have a VCR, so we were happy to see the repeat the next day. I recall hating the shape of the Enterprise. I'm with you, Alfredo, on that one. Finding Picard to be too presumptuous, and beardless Riker seeming weak. That's why the beard is the sign of the better Star Trek Next Generation. I did take a liking to Data right away. I also recall we were puzzled by Worf, as there was no clear explanation of how there's a Klingon on a Starfleet bridge. Right. He liked Will Wheaton because he was the same age as the character. Even when he became annoying, I kept a soft spot for him. I agree that Troy and Yar were annoying, but I think Troy evolved, and by her appearance in Voyager, she was a solid character. I agree with you. I end up liking Troy a lot more than she did at the beginning. The first season was indeed dreadful for the most part. I don't know if I'd say dreadful, but it had its high points and low points. But the second was better.
More low than high,
yeah, right.
In my opinion.
And the second season was better, and indeed by 3 it had found its rhythm. So thank you for that.
I think it really took off in the third, but second is, I don't know how much better than it is than the first.
Yeah, it had
especially with the Dr. Pulaski factor.
Yes, that's true. So that's our feedback. If you want to give us some feedback on this episode, on Star Trek Discovery's Vulcan Hello, or any of our previous episodes, please do so. You can go to sqpn.com/trek or the SQPN Facebook page and leave us feedback on the episodes there, or you can send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. You can find links relevant to our discussion on our show notes on sqpn.com, and we'll be back again with a future episode of Secrets of Star Trek. We'll be discussing another great story from Star Trek. We haven't decided what it is yet, so we'll have to leave you in suspense for what it is we'll be talking about next time. But until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
And thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
And since I began by wishing you both a Vulcan hello, I'll conclude with a Vulcan goodbye. Live long and prosper.
I'll give you a Klingon goodbye. I forget now. Kapla! That's what it is. I was trying to remember that on the spur of the moment, and I forgot it. And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. This is Dom Bettinelli again. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and that you'll help us keep producing the podcast you love. Thank you for your generosity. To make your pledge and find out about the free thank you gifts we'd like to send you, visit sqpn.com/give. That's sqpn.com/give.